Hi, everybody, and welcome to the most recent episode of Let Me Introduce You. I'm Marion Roach Smith, and this is a monthly series where I introduce you to people that you should know. And this is one of my favorite people. Paula Hamm and I have known each other for several years and had some of the most in-depth conversations that I've ever been honored to have. Before we jump in, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I need all of you to tell me, or some of you, or just a few of you to tell me you can see the screen and hear my voice. You won't see us. Oh, great, Natalie. See, there's Natalie, right on. Perfect, Brian. Thank you, Sarah. All right, we're good. Hi, Dwayne. Oh, look at those very familiar names. Oh, that's lovely. All right, good. So you're going to get a recording of this tomorrow, about 24 hours after we get off the call. We're going to keep it to an hour today because I know you're busy. Paula's busy. And so let's just jump right in and get going. We're going to talk about transforming trauma into creativity. I'm Marion Roach Smith. I am the person who started the Memoir Project. I'm a writer, I'm an author, and I'm a teacher. And I'm very, very, very pleased to introduce my dear friend, Paula Hamm, who is a psychoanalyst in private practice in Virginia. She's a member of the American Psychoanalytic Association and the chair of the discussion group Psychodynamics of Religion and Spirituality. In addition, she's a member of the Washington-Baltimore Center for Psychoanalysis and the New Directions Writing Program. Hi, Paula, and you're going to set us up with a bit of an exercise as we open this today. So tell us what you've got for us, Paula.
Well, first of all, Marion, thank you so much for the introduction, and it's an honor to be with you and all those who are attending during the season of light. It's such an exciting time, Christmas and whatever religious holiday you may participate in with the traditions. And yet we also know that Norman Rockwell painted what he wanted, not what he had in life.
Mm-hmm.
So, right. So I'd like to just start to do a 30-second meditation to get us all kind of centered, because trauma is not an easy topic to talk about.
Yes.
So, and a lot of nuances to it. So come into this space and enter into yourself. Place your hands over your heart and feel your heartbeat to still ourselves. Be still and know you are loved. Be still and know you are. Be still and know. Be. Finding our grounding in the ways we know ourselves is so essential in our journey of writing. So maybe I'll stop there, Marion, and
That's
see
great.
where you want to go from there.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that. And I think that acknowledging that trauma and writing into trauma is so difficult and that we need to start from a place of putting our hands on our hearts is very generous. So I'm assuming, and I think I know a lot of the people that are on this call, they're writing memoir, they may be in recovery from trauma and writing memoir, and they may be some people who are curious about memoir writing and why it feels the way it does. So I thought we would just start right there, Paula, because for years, I've taught memoir for 30 years. And when I was first teaching memoir and people would say to me, "This is so therapeutic," I would bristle. And I think it's because I was raised in a newspaper, think that, well, then that's not really legitimate writing because it shouldn't be therapeutic. You should just get the facts down on the page. I have of course, changed my opinion on that. But let's ask you. You're the psychoanalyst and you're the writer. I've read your beautiful stuff. So talk to me a little bit about whether or not writing memoir is therapeutic, or how would you phrase it? What is it, this process that people find so what?
Well, I'm going to give you a quote from Virginia Woolf.
Mm-hmm.
But before I do that, I think I want to say that in trauma, why is it so hard? Because we remember in fragments.
Mm-hmm.
We don't remember in cohesive narrative. And it takes a long time to put into words what happened,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to give two examples, maybe. Yes, I think writing memoir is therapeutic, but not always. I mean, there are people who may not be ready to write, and they may need to be able to sit with the therapist long enough to be able to have enough language to be able to do it. Because we don't always have language for what happened.
Mm-hmm.
We feel it in our bodies, and that's why I wanted to start with putting our hands to our hearts, because there's a great book that's out, The Body Keeps the Score, and emotions are absorbed in the body first in the nonverbal period in the earliest part of life. Up until about age 5, we just absorb our environment, and we really don't have language in our young, immature brains in order to put language to what happens. But listen to what Virginia Woolf said. I just love this. She said, I did for myself what psychoanalysts do for their patients. I expressed some long and deeply felt emotion. And expressing it, I explained it and then laid it to rest. She wanted to explore what she remembered feeling at difficult junctures in her life. She wanted to link these feelings to events by taking herself back in time to specific moments of being, which is really what, Marion, you teach about. A slice of life is what we write in memoir, not our whole life, but about a certain moment. And then Virginia Woolf goes on to say, it is only by putting it into words that I can make it whole. This wholeness means that it has lost its power to hurt me. It gives me, perhaps, because by doing so, I take away the pain. A great delight to put the several parts together. From this, I reach what I might call a philosophy. That we, I mean, all human beings are connected with this. That's the whole world is a work of art. That we are all parts of the work of art.
Well, that's
Epic
beautiful.
book.
I get that from Virginia Woolf, and I get that from reading the any of the pieces, any of the books that I love so much about how she can put together, connect those emotional moments of life. And I love what you said about the trauma is remembered in fragments. I think that's an extraordinary thing for everyone to think of for a minute as they're trying, as I hear from students every day. I don't remember it. I just have these fragments. And well, that I say is what you need to write. And you need to write those shards, those jagged edged little memories that you've got. And I thought of inviting you on today, Paula, because we had an extraordinary conversation when I was rewriting my book, The Memoir Project, and my publisher had invited me to rewrite it and update it. And what had happened to me in the time between publication, the original publication, and then a few years ago, was one of the major things that happened is during Me Too, when the first high-profile person was arrested. My email blocks just blew up, literally. We had so many people suddenly saying, I've never told my story. It's 45 years later, it's 20 years later, but now I feel safe to tell my story. And it was astonishing. My assistant and I were amazed by this huge number of people who came forward. But then later that summer, as I guess it was a year later, during the Supreme Court hearings, the Kavanaugh hearings, it went silent. And I'd had about a year of my classes were literally in one master class where I have 7 writers. Every single person was writing about sexual assault. And it was a safety period. People felt that they could come out. And then after the Kavanaugh hearings, they felt hushed again. So I called you up and I said, Paula, I noticed something during that period, which is that people were changed by writing their stories. And it seemed to me that it was changed in a very good way. I don't think they were altering the endings. I think they were experiencing, it wasn't like they were making a happy ending out of their story, but they were engaging in it at a different level than they had been able to do before. And you and I talked about this. So I wanted to go back to that and talk about and really ask you, from that period that was so beautiful, that of having so many writers step forward, what is it that happens when we get our hands on our stories, do you think, Paula?
Well, I think the whole Me Too movement and the whole Kavanaugh experience, and then of course, since we've had that conversation, Marion, we've been through, an existential trauma with the pandemic and economics and climate change and so on and so forth. We've had a lot of external events where there's been a lot of people speaking. And the number one feeling that gets in the way of people feeling about their capacity to be able to write has to do with shame.
Mm.
The feeling of shame is very, very hard to talk about, let alone write about it. And I think the Me Too movement was the start of people coming out and saying, well, if you can talk about it, I can talk about it too. So there was a community of people that made it, like you said, it made it okay, I think, to tolerate whatever shame was connected to whatever the experience was. But the underlying feeling that came out, I think, was shame.
Hmm. Yeah. And so if the we don't want to lose this ability to get into our stories. And so if we have to push past shame, if we're not having a Me Too, if Me Too has been mitigated, if we don't have all this community around us right now that we did for a while, what can you talk about with all of the writers that are listening? We have an extraordinary number of writers listening in, about getting their hands on their stories. And I think the biggest fear people have is that they have it in shards. We've got that, and and maybe we'll dig into that a little bit more. But also that they don't know how the story ends. And I would say, well, get your hands on it and see what happens. But what do you think is happening when they get their hands on their story and they move into shame or past shame, and what, as they start to write about it, what is that process that's going on?
Well, I think it's a lot of it's unconscious. So if you think about the parallels between being in therapy and writing, that when people come in and our patients coming in the office, usually what they present is just the tip of the iceberg.
Hmm.
And it takes a lot of curiosity and a lot of tolerance of not knowing and being able to kind of be in an uncertain place to allow words to emerge. So on the page, I think when we start off with one idea and we think, wait, that's not quite what I want to write about, we're always looking at, what's driving the story? What's the pain? What is it? What is the story I really want to tell?
Hmm.
And it takes, that's why we're always editing, right? Because we're doing layers upon layers upon layers. And I think it's a more of an unconscious process than it is conscious. We may start with the intention, good intentions. I really want to write this story, but
Hmm.
it's the unconscious that gets us a little bit tripped up. And, as Stephen Pressfield, who wrote The War of Art, uh, he wrote so beautifully in the opening pages of his book. I don't know if you remember this, Marianne, about that opening line. Um, he says about resistance. Let me see if I can
Oh,
find it.
resistance. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, here, I love this. The unlived life. Most of us have two lives, the life we live and the unlived life within us.
Mm,
Between the two stands resistance. It's
yeah.
probably the best description of resistance I've ever read.
And it's very real, right? And there's so many
Oh,
reasons not to write the story. People say to me all the time, well, it's a story of abuse. And my mother didn't acknowledge the abuse because it was my uncle, her brother, or it's the story of abuse and everybody's still alive, or it's a story of abuse and I'm so ashamed. And yet, as I find uh, the success, if you will, that some people experience begins with not telling anybody involved that you're writing it. For me, I always give the advice not to say, to your mother, I'm going to set this record straight. I'm going to write this story. So that you have to instead find people who are invested in your success, which gets back to your idea of community and, having someone to talk to. I frequently ask people, or I almost always ask people in stories of abuse, do you have a therapist? Can you imagine having somebody to help process this? But the idea that you don't tell people that are involved in the story what you're doing and see instead what it is that actually comes out, the way you said, what comes out of the unconscious, what comes out from all that annotation, everything we've ever thought, felt, heard, written, eaten, is all in there. And, let's see what comes out before you start telling everybody you're going to set the record straight, which is just going to cramp. I find it's just going to cork you up even harder. What do you think in terms of
Well,
keeping your
as
view?
you were talking, I was thinking about, you know me about the power of silence, that I think there's a great role in starting to write is to, kind of be still, and maybe even before a writing session, just be quiet and listen
Mm,
to what the heart, listen to your heartbeat, start with that. And then watch what goes across the surface of your mind. And you may be surprised. It may be a thought that you never thought of.
mm,
Do it for 15 minutes and then sit down and then try to write what you just saw. You might not have seen anything, but I guarantee you that what you're trying to do, what we're all trying to do, is try to get into the vein of the uniqueness of each soul's story. Yeah, they're about abuse, but it may have a unique purpose and meaning that is yet to be discovered. How do you make meaning out of such horrific events? We are meaning seeking creatures. We want to have meaning in our lives. And I think until we find that, we can be tortured. We can be, stuck.
yes.
So
I find,
writing,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Yeah, you can be. And I find that in every abuse story that I've edited and coached, I've long ago lost count how many of which have been published, that there's also a story, almost always, but certainly many times, a story of voice, of losing one's voice, that people discover, that it's absolutely there's a story of abuse, but the actual act of abuse, the actual compounding number of events are not what you're going to be really recalling. It's not, we don't need all of them on the page. What we need is to watch the transcendent change. Not that we're looking for just a happy ending, but we're looking for, as you just said, we discover, oh, it's a story of me reclaiming my voice. It's not a story of me recounting my abuse. And things then start to change for the writer who gets possession of the story of her voice, of his voice coming back to him after he was told not to tell, after he was told, I'll kill you if you tell, after he's told, this is then something else indeed, which is a story about reclaiming one's voice, which is a very different thing to write. What, you know?
right, right. And you're also bringing up, without saying it, I think that in trying to discover one's own unique voice, is that writing fosters resilience. And I love
Mm,
the word resilience, because it's
hmm.
a quality that enables people, and all of us have them, difficulties, but how to thrive despite them. How do
Yes.
we, yeah, how do we, when we have, horrific things happen, whether it's acute trauma or a strain trauma that goes on and on and on. I mean, how do we live alongside and through and really the answer is we have to nurture resilience.
Hmm.
And writing can do that.
Yes.
It's a discipline to have to sit down, and maybe you start off and you just write about a happy moment.
Yeah.
Everybody hopefully has a happy moment in their life, or a favorite place. I love the mountains. I love to swim in lakes. I have
Hmm.
happy places that I go to, and that can also help um, balance, the other piece around what's so painful, because
Yes.
what we're always trying to get to, yeah, perfect, right.
Yeah.
Sometimes emotions are too much to contain.
Yes. And
Uh,
you published this piece recently in the winter edition of Voices: The Art and Science of Psychotherapy, and I was fascinated by this quote. You talk about, and you wrote these beautiful few lines. Sometimes emotions are too much to contain, and being still can help slow down the mind to begin to process with each breath, one feeling at a time. Perhaps this is my way of being in a complex world. Soulful, attuned listening is what I practice both personally and as a psychoanalyst as I remain open for hope. So let's talk about the quiet to the hope. The quiet that you said, maybe at beginning each session of writing, we should get quiet. And what were really, I think this idea of hope is just so beautifully put. But talk to me a bit more about the relationship to hope in the quiet.
I think it has to do with openness. You know, what happens in trauma is that the mind wants to shut down because of pain. And maybe it, you know, when a person has too much pain, um, the best they can do is try to find ways to distract themselves, but the pain doesn't go away. So how, when we are traumatized, how do we begin to feel open? And that's where the issue of safety, you know, how can I sit with myself, and can I think a happy thought? Can I remember something good about my life? I maybe just sit with that and
Hmm.
um, and see what emerges. But again, you know, I think writing, like in the process of therapy, one of the greatest tools that I think we have, at least from the therapeutic side of things, is that about how can we nurture our curiosity about ourselves.
Hmm.
If we have a thought, can we follow that thought long enough and link it maybe to another thought?
Hmm.
And you know, maybe in one thought leading to the next thought, you'll have a feeling connected to, oh, I had a grandmother who really loved me, or I
Hmm.
had, you know, I had a neighbor who took me aside and bought me, you know, an orange popsicle one day. I don't know, you know, it's that kind of thing.
Hmm.
That something that's so buried might just pop up, but there has to be the emotional space for that. And again, when we are traumatized, the mind collapses and we cannot play. So part of play in the purest sense of, you know, in writing, we like to play with words, you
Hmm.
know, and how do we get to play has to come with trying to open things up a little bit in order to, you know, be in our sandbox, as you might say.
Yeah, and
And
I think writing is a form of. I think that's the kind of thing that I wouldn't have said all those years ago working at the New York Times, that writing is a form of play. But writing is a form of asking the self, what have you got? And what can I play with here? What can I do? And even in writing about the darkest stuff, we have the opportunity to make some connections, to witness, as you just said. I refer to it as the human pilot light. You know, what meager, maybe in the most meager of circumstances, what is it that kept you lit? And how was that planted? Was it the neighbor next door who did feed you when nobody at home fed you? Is it
Mhm.
the one movie you saw? Is it the one book that you read? Is it the second grade teacher who said you were smart? You know, in the Child Called It, I interviewed the author of The Child Called It a few months ago, and it was a second grade teacher. It was one human while he's, you know, chained up and starved in the
Oh,
basement of his own home. There's this
oh.
one teacher who says, "You're a good boy. You're a bright boy." And these are the things that keep something lit in us, but we have to get quiet to find them. So it's a discovery of what we have on us, of what we had on us, of what we want to look at. But you know, what do you think the writer? What's the return on investment of this of this writing process? I have a lot of thoughts on this in terms of, I think most of my friends talk like this. Paula, I went to this restaurant last night. It was like so great. I mean, it was like great. You just got to go. And you know, you learned nothing. Absolutely nothing. But if I sat down and thought about my ideas of eating or cooking or the community of what food provides, and we had a conversation, if I sat down instead and wrote out for myself and you what happened to me at this restaurant that made it such a transformative experience, I might learn a lot about my own appetites, about my own desire to share those with you, about my desire to connect back to a meal I had 25 years ago, about my own home kitchen where my grandmother kept everybody sane. I might learn a lot. And so those are what I start to think of. So what do you think the writer, you've talked about this a bit already, but in terms of the encouragement we can give people in terms of what they can expect to to experience and discover in this process. Have you got any more that you'd like to say about that?
Well, I had two thoughts while you were talking. And I think, what you described in the restaurant and the way that I want to use the word you mentalized it. You began to reflect on, well, what really happened in that moment? You kind of
Yes.
step back and this is what I learned. This is what I saw. This is what I smelt. This is what I felt. And so we call that, just observing oneself and reflecting. And the clinical or the other word a lot of people throw around is we could mentalize it. We could put it in our brains and make it something more cohesive. And writing permits the construction of a cohesive, elaborate, thoughtful personal narrative in a way, I think, even more profound than just speaking about our experiences.
Oh, I love that. I agree with you. And if we say, I don't believe in God, right? That's a statement. I get it. But I would love to sit down with myself and write out what I went through to get to that place, perhaps, or where I started, when my doubts first started. I said this to somebody recently. I remember, I'm a lapsed many things. I lapsed from a whole lot of different Christian religions. Now I have my own sort of delicatessen version. But I remember being a little kid and going into the church basement at the Lutheran church where we were members and seeing the minister put the communion cups in the dishwasher and finding that the whole thing was so pedestrian and unholy. I liked all the stuff that was going on upstairs, but as soon as I saw the downstairs, I was like, I have my doubts. And, that was the beginning of my own inquiry. And I can make that a funny story, or I can talk about when did my inquiry begin? And then how did I piece together from all the different exposures I've had to all the different world religions and spirituality and gardening and being outside, my own thing. And those are what I find to be the majestic experiences of writing, right? Where you go and say, well, what are all the quilt pieces that went into this thing, right? I mean, I'm sure you've got them. I know you do because
Right,
I've read your work. So
right.
it's a bounty, right? It's there to be discovered, even in trauma, is what I would say. What would you say?
Well, I can't help but pull in something a little bit religious or spiritual here because I think of the words of St. Augustine,
Hmm.
where he said, grace builds on nature.
Mm,
Grace
yeah,
builds on nature.
yeah,
I
yeah,
love that.
yeah.
Grace. I mean, I don't,
Grace.
grace is friendship. Grace, if you translate what the word grace means, it really is, in the truest, now I'm Roman Catholic and I'm very monastic in my thinking. So they would say that that's friendship with God. But I think that grace can come through really intimate friendships, people who empower one another, like you do me and you do everybody on this call. You listen, you are present, you help people think and process, what they're trying to get out. And that's a real grace that you give to people just through your very being. I started with the word be, and that's how you are with people. So
Well,
you are,
thank you.
and yeah, I think you're very graceful.
Well, I think you have given me such grace in these conversations that we've had. And I think that it's the grace that people don't know is in this process that I would say you will find that in the inquiry. If you can have a conversation with somebody else that affords you to go deeper, great. If not, try it, um, try diving in. Because I think this next slide really gets at people say, well, I don't want to relive it. I don't want to. I don't want to. I don't want to go back there. And I ask this of every memoir writer I interview on the Cordy podcast. I always ask them, what are we asking a memoir writer to do? Are we asking them to relive it, reimagine it, reanimate it, or report on it coolly from here? And so, first of all, what do you think this process is? And then I want to get some feelings from you about how we care for ourselves while we write into trauma. But let's start with the first part. What are we doing? Are we reliving it? Are we just reimagining it? Are we reanimating it? Because there are some things that no one wants to reanimate. But, you and I have had some
Well,
pretty in-depth
yeah.
conversations about this.
Well, I think what's driving any writer has to do with some kind of pain.
Mm,
And the pain is the portal into a deepening sense of self. If we can tolerate the awful feelings that may go with it. Because again, I want to reiterate, we are meaning seeking creatures. We want to have meaning. Why am I here? What good am I if I can't make sense out of what just happened to me, whatever it is?
hmm
I think that we are people are driven by a sense of purpose for the most part, unless the sense of self has collapsed. But I don't have anyone who comes into my offices who's not seeking to try to make meaning out of what happened. And you're right to ask the question, are we writing are we re-traumatizing ourselves? I think that's a danger. And there's a lot of people in the writing field who talk about this. James Penderbaker, do you know that name?
hmm
He says to improve your spirits long term by writing, you must endure difficult feelings initially.
hmm
Venting isn't sufficient. You must write detailed accounts linking feelings and events.
Mm, yeah.
We have to be able to start linking not just the event, but see, this is what happens in trauma: is things get stuck in our brain, and that's why I said it initially. We remember in fragments. There's stuff that gets stuck in there, and then it comes out sideways. It manifests maybe in anger. It manifests in poor relationships, or just an unresolved understanding of what did happen. So I think that the writing can get it out of those crevices, one memory at a time, one bit at a time, to work towards that cohesive sense of self.
hmm
So the more writing succeeds as a narrative by being detailed, organized, compelling, vivid, lucid, the more health and emotional benefits can be derived from writing.
hmm hmm That's a good one, and I appreciate that. I think that we're not asking people to relive it. I think we're asking them. I always ask people to come up with an argument before they start writing, and to see what it is you're willing to share with us from your experience. And because we're not asking you to just recount, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, but instead to have a look from here and report on your transcendent change. Again, it doesn't have to be a happy ending. Maybe the end of the book says, and so you need to be comfortable living with uncertainty. But if you've shown us how you've learned to do that, that's a very worthwhile experience for the reader if you can help us in the quest to live with uncertainty, because we're all living with uncertainty. So
Well, and
what
boy,
yeah.
that's such a mature thing. If
hmm
if each of us could learn to tolerate uncertainty even more, that's really the edge of our growth. Because openness, how do we stay open in uncertainty? The mind naturally wants to close down and say, I got this, I know what I'm doing, because we all want to stay in something familiar. That's just natural.
Yeah.
The mind doesn't want to have to, they want something to hold on to. We all want something to hold on to, but I really do think that if we can stay open, 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 we can be also filled with some surprises.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I was no, no, never have I been more surprised than the memory of the confirmation of the glasses in in the dishwasher as sort of the beginning point of my inquiry into Christianity. I mean, it's funny, but it also is real. And I kept traveling back and all of the different things, and there's this moment. And so what about caring for ourselves while we're writing into trauma? I think being in therapy is really a very important partner if you're going to go back into something. But do you advise people, to take it in small chunks, or do you advise people to, break it and break it into bits? What do you think about the best way? I mean, I always tell people never get out of bed saying, I'm going to write a book today. I always say, I'm going to write 3 pages today, or I'm going to write 500 words today. That slowly, carefully, and with some control, we get some control over our stories. But what about you? What do you think how best can we ask people to care for themselves during writing into trauma?
Well, I think it's a great question, and it's actually a bigger question about, how do we do self-care? And so I want to kind of hold that open to what are the ways that we do care for ourselves. And I immediately go to Oliver Sacks, who I just love.
Hmm.
Wrote a lot, and he said, I don't have the quote right in front of me, but it paraphrased something like this: the two greatest non-therapeutic things that we can do for ourselves is to go out into nature and garden
Hmm.
and listen to music.
Hmm.
So, in the course of our day, our week, our months, how much are each of our listeners spending time outside, observing, smelling flowers, or looking at the changing nature of trees, or have ever tried to draw a tree, to open up other spaces that might help with resilience. So when you do go back and you sit down and you're going to say, I'm going to give myself a half hour here, and I'm going to see how much I can write. And keep the expectations small. I'm only going to write a half hour a day. I'm only going to write 15 minutes a day. And I always say to my patients, well, you know what? If it begins to feel unmanageable, or you find yourself crying, if you can't write through the tears, then I would stop. I'd get up, I'd take a walk, and I would do something else, and I'll try again tomorrow.
Mm.
Because it's a discipline. I think that working with our interior worlds, whether it's through therapy and we're trying to trust another person to listen to us, or we're learning how to write our thoughts, we have to be disciplined, and we have to really want to do it.
Yes. Well, writing begins with discipline, absolutely. And so, is there, I think there's a writing life to be had long before you, quote, figure it all out. In other words, people say to me all the time, especially when writing into trauma or about trauma or from trauma, they say, well, I haven't figured it out yet, so I can't write. And I think, I'm not sure that's true. I think that we really benefit from reading blog posts, personal essays, op-eds, long form essays, and books from people who are mid experience, from people who are in the process of figuring things out. I don't think anything actually gets all figured out, but writing without the conclusion of, and now it's all good. No, 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 no. Writing to be comfortable with uncertainty, writing to, and that's as good as I can do it today, writing to, sobriety is one day at a time, writing from here, I think should be encouraged. I don't think people should wait until they have the big answer they thought they were going to seek. But, I'm not a psychoanalyst, Paula, you are. So what do you think about writing amid and during the process?
Well, I like all the things that you've listed there, and I agree with you, but I do think that there is one that is missing for me, and that is journal keeping.
Yeah.
And obviously, in spiritual traditions, people, I mean, the journal of Saint Teresa of Lisieux or the Little Flower, I mean, they all have journals about, they're really neat to read. John Steinbeck, before he wrote his great novel, he kept a journal every day. He wrote in his journal, and every day before he started to write, he wrote a letter to a friend and walked it to the mailbox. And that's the way he warmed up as he, free age of internet, he put pen to paper and he wrote a love note or just a little "I'm thinking of you" and sent it off to a friend somewhere in the country. And he said in his journal, that's how he got warmed up to write. And I just loved reading that. It's the Journal of John Steinbeck. It's really cool.
I
Um,
love that.
yeah, and my other favorite, of course, is Thomas Merton. If you get me into my
Hmm.
religious world and spiritual world, Thomas Merton also was a prolific writer, and he kept many journals that turned into books. And that's another great read. Any of his journals on solitude, on talking to God, on the false self, the true self. I mean, he just wrote. And then through those journals, he would pull out the themes. And he didn't do essays or op-eds or, he just
Hmm.
wrote books after
Yeah.
he did journal keeping. And I encourage all my patients that come in who have a tendency to want to write. I have them in their journals try to write, but I also encourage them. I'm big on collaging. It's
Hmm.
something I did with my oldest son, who's a jazz musician now, not realizing that this was actually a really great thing to do. But go through newspapers, go through magazines, and just pull out images and pictures and put it in a journal. And
Hmm.
words will start to pop up. If you have trouble finding words, you can keep a picture journal.
Yeah.
Another way to access the unconscious.
Absolutely. So we touched on earlier, and I want to, we're going to take questions in just a minute, but we touched earlier on the idea of getting your hands on your story. And the one thing we didn't really get to was the idea, and I mentioned it, but I wanted to dig into it a little bit. You're not changing the ending, but you're choosing where this story goes. In other words, I don't think you're not saying, "Oh, please make this a happy story," when there's, rampant alcoholism or abuse or some other trauma. But you're choosing when the story ends, is what I talk a lot with my students about. In other words, you got your hands on the story, you got your voice back. It's it has a dimension of change to the outlook of the writer, I think, when they have the ability to say, this is what this story is really about. So I just would love you to finish that thought. I don't think we really finished that thought. What happens when you decide this is where it ends, or this is how it's going to go, or this is what I'm going to cover in this? Is that, I think people think that's not a legitimate way to interact with something that they had so set in stone for so long. I was abused, or my family was neglectful, but now you're getting that story in your own hands. And so I guess I'd like to have you include a couple of tips of people of how they can get their hands on it and when they can put an end to the story. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, again, the words that come into my mind as I'm listening to you, Marion, have to do with, what meaning has come out of this experience.
Yeah.
What purpose does it serve? What purpose can it serve? Or, maybe even, now that I've understood my story better, maybe it'll help just one person. And it's
Right.
about, we live in community. We are all, if I look at life through the one trajectory of that we were all siblings and
Hmm.
that we were all connected to one another in some way. We're a family of humanity, and that we can help one another. Maybe something one person writes will be something I never thought about before. Like,
Yes.
I wanted to mention Bill Styron's, Into Darkness. All of us probably know that, but how he suffered to write that that essay on his depression, and that has helped so many people, so many
Yes.
people
You can help.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You can help so many people, and you can present, for instance, for those people whose families really cannot support them, and they in turn do not support what their families did to them or for them, write books about making family by choice. And
right.
those kinds of experiences allow others to have the courage or the determination to make community elsewhere. So I think you're right. I think the sharing of what you come to, I think you can't know where this will go until you dig into it. But I guess I would just want to be really encouraging to people to dig in, because for the most part, what I've seen is just extraordinary change in the writers and in the
Mhm,
readers,
mhm.
right? When they get to see the change on the page. One of the things that people say to me all the time is, "Oh, come on, there's no room on the shelves for another story of alcoholism recovery or recovery from abuse or recovery from anything." And I just like to say, this is why there are categories at the bookstore, like recovery books, alcoholism recovery. The bookstores want you to write your books. They want you to,
Mhm.
because they're looking for more. So I guess I'm just asking you to back me up on this one, sister, that, that we need more books. What do you think?
Well, I think we need in this day and age where we live in so much trauma. I think we need each other. We need to hear each other's stories so that we can be for one another. And if you can get it into a book form, somebody's going to pick up that book and they're going to say, "Oh my God, I wish I could have written this. I couldn't, but this person did it for me." And you know, it might be one gem, one thought. And you know, we have to not think in terms of so much of what we produce, but how we can help each other live more fully. Because life is hard. We all suffer in one way or the other. And whatever you've gone through, it does have a meaning, and there is purpose there somewhere, but only you can find that.
Yeah, I think that's just such a beautiful place to leave that. And this is where you can be found at paulajhamm.com. Your writing is there, and I'm so grateful that it is. We're going to turn to questions in a minute. I'm going to say if you want more from us at the Memoir Project, we now have a page on the website that shows you, depending on what you want to do, if you want to get started writing memoir, if you want to write and publish a book-length memoir, if you want to live the writing life in full. We have a page this is called the system page, where you can figure out like what classes to take and all of that. So I always just like to mention that so we can show you that. And then I just love to take some questions. So what we have is a questions box. And if you can use that questions box, that would be wonderful. Let's see, I'm trying to get my cursor to allow me. Let's see, questions. I don't know why it's making, whoops, it's making dinging noises at me, but you know, that's just the way it goes sometimes. So if you can start, no, my cursor's not allowing me to do anything. I don't know what that means. So Paula, why don't you just answer a couple more questions for me while I try to figure out the technology of getting the questions answered, letting me see the questions. When you sit down to speak to somebody at the beginning of an experience of them writing, after you cover the idea of quiet, what are the other kinds of things you invite them to engage in?
Well, I always like to ask the question, you know, what happened? And let it evolve out of that. Not having a preconceived understanding of maybe what they're writing, but you know, what did happen that you find yourself wanting to write about? Maybe they just give me an opening
Mm-hmm.
to help with curiosity.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a great place to start. So I'm trying to get the screen to keep showing, but we're having a little tech difficulty. If anybody could just write in and just tell me if you're still connected, that would be great. Let's see. If we're still, it looks like we're paused, but I'm not sure. Just if you can, yes, you're still connected. Okay, yeah, still here. Good. That's right. Somehow the cursor froze, but now we're good. So let's take some questions from you, if you could, please. That would be great. Here we've got a bunch. So Brian asks, memoirs and biographies grew 26% in the last 5 years versus all other categories, which are declining in sales. Yes, that's true. So I guess that's a statement. And he says they're the preferred genre of 31% of Americans. I'm not surprised to read that. Andrea asks, how do you define trauma, Paula? What is trauma different from abuse?
I think it's a great question, and there's different kinds of trauma too. You know, trauma is anything that leaves us. It manifests in a feeling of disorientation and fragmentation. We just, whatever the event was, we can't make sense of it.
Yeah.
So the protective shield about how we thought about ourselves, maybe our lives, is shattered. And there's two kinds of trauma. There's acute trauma and there's strain trauma. So an acute trauma would be like the sudden death of a parent at age 12.
Yes.
That will have profound impact on development for the 12-year-old for the rest of their life. A strain trauma, I like to give the example of growing up, could be in a household where there's alcoholism and there's a lot of yelling, there's a lot of shouting, maybe there's not even alcohol. It could be there's poverty and there's no food. Anything that creates tension and the inability to be able to relax. So, if we think ideally of the mother-child, the mother that's there to protect and hold and love and be present and contain, and all that becomes shattered when there's, an awful event.
Absolutely. Good definitions. Brian asks if either one of us would like to give a TED Talk at TEDx Asbury Park in April. That sounds wonderful, Brian. Why don't you be in touch with me, and I will share that invitation with Paula, mroachsmith@gmail.com, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Maybe we could do it
So
together.
yeah, that'd be even more fun. Martha asks, just sharing inspiration drawn from Sean Thomas Dougherty. Quote, why bother? Because right now there is someone out there with a wound in the exact image of your words. Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you, Martha. That's so kind of you. I think I'm going to get that embroidered on something. Tess asks, do you think that writing in community, say as part of a writer's group, is especially helpful when writing memoir? What do you think, Paula?
I think it's a double-edged sword because I think we do need community around us to help us with the editing and rethinking. But I think there's a place for making sure that you as the writer have a quiet space to really, a room of your own, as Virginia Woolf would say, right? You go to a place and it's a very sacred thing to write out your own thoughts and feelings. So I think both are really needed because too much input can also be overstimulating, especially if you're working with some kind of sexual trauma, and the brain can only handle so much. So you might find that the solitude, you need more of that, and then go to somebody, you go to a group and say, let me look at this with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you can get too many voices on a story. And I know
Yeah.
sometimes people say to me, I've had 8 beta readers on this. And I think, I hope that worked for you. It wouldn't work for me. I have
Wouldn't
a
work for
sister.
me either.
No, you and I have talked about this. I have a sister who's a full-time writer. She and I exchange stuff. My best friend is a full-time writer. He and I exchange stuff. I trust them, and I also know they're invested in my success, which is a really important difference. Sarah says her editor told me my writing is open but not honest. What is your take on the difference? So I find that to be an extraordinary thing for an editor to say, and I hope that if you can take that well. I would take that to mean that you're telling us a lot, but you maybe aren't going as deep as we need. The sort of depth of curiosity into the derivation of these feelings and the inquiry that we need in memoir is not telling us what you did, but showing us what you did with it, is the way I make that distinction. What about you, Paula?
Oh, the
Open but
first thing
not
that came to my mind, yeah, open but not, so maybe it's not coming deep enough from the heart. They're not feeling, I think like a good singer. I love art in any genre. If you think about music, Tom Petty was so great because he touched his words, touched everybody's heart in his song. So I think in our writing, it has to be able to really come from our heart in order to touch another person's heart.
Yeah, I listened to this podcast yesterday, the Daily, the New York Times Daily. I think it was yesterday's. It might have been the day before. And I was very surprised to find how smart it was about the world that is Taylor Swift. And the
Ugh.
two interviewers agreed on the word specificity, that her lyrics touch people because of the specifics in them,
Mhm.
that they're not these broadly watercolored love songs of I hope he comes back, but that she's got this betrayal in the specifics. She's got all the, and I wrote down the word specificity. I thought that was really interesting, the way they talked about it. So for what
Mhm.
it is. Stephen says my memoir included more than a decade of childhood sexual abuse and 2 adult rapes. Oh, Stephen.
Mhm.
Writing
Mhm.
the memoir gave me a literary voice that I never had in writing fiction. Is it common that writing about trauma helps a writer find their voice? We talked about this earlier. over and over, I find that people think they're writing, they say, I want to write about abuse. And then in the process, they discover when they lost their voice, how to get back their voice, and then what life was like once they got their voice back. That being the 3-act structure: the loss of voice because of the abuse, the getting the voice back in Act 2, and what life is like now with their very own voice that they maybe never had because the abuse took place in childhood. So yes, I think yes, Stephen. I think yes, and good for you. What do you think, Paula?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yes, but I would use different language coming from my world. I would
Mhm.
use the word, use the phrase, authenticity is hard won,
Mm,
WON, like how, because trauma covers up the soul, covers up the heart. That's where I talked about the collapse of self. And the writing, it's like you came out from under a rock and you said you got a literary voice, but I think you probably just kind of discovered a sense of self that you never even knew was there, with all its complexity and beauty and uniqueness. You were able to claim that maybe for the first time in a way that was not seen in you as a little boy.
yeah, gorgeous. Beautifully put, Paula. Melissa asks how we graduate from the advice, just tell us what happened, into something more nuanced and without every gory detail. Well, the mantra that I teach the people I work with, Melissa, is it's not about what memoir writing is not about what you did. It's about what you did with it. It's a transcendent experience. We want to know what's at stake in Act 1, what you tried in Act 2, and what worked in Act 3, so that we can watch you change, and we want the emotional content in there. So, Paula, what do you think? How do you go from just what happened into something more nuanced?
Again, that's where I think sitting with yourself in silence and really digging deep, and trying to just pay attention to what bubbles up inside and being really honest with whatever bubbles up and trying to write about, your interior world is a discipline and it takes time. So the nuances are going to come out of, knowing yourself in so many different angles and different ways and different experiences.
Yeah,
Just takes a lot of hard digging.
it does. It does. It's good digging, though. I think it's really good digging. Adrienne asks, how can I grow my writing community and connect with others into their trauma? So we have a series coming up. Again, we do a writing community, a community building experience every once in a while here at the Memoir Project. It'll be back in February, and we have a Facebook group, and people are meeting each other there and then partnering up as writing partners, forming small groups. I also teach a master class where 7 writers and I spend 6 months together writing first drafts of memoir. So I think that's just a question that I feel pretty strongly about. It's meeting other writers, and that's the way we do it here. Anything to add to that, Paula, in terms of where to
No,
meet other
just trying
writers?
to find your tribe. I think it may take some, experimenting with yourself to see, try to get yourself into a group. Just go. And if you can find one person you can connect with, run with it for a little bit. If that doesn't work out, then find another group. They're out there. They're all over there. They're all over.
They
But
are.
Marion is such a great group of people that I'm sure you
We
can
have
find
really
somebody.
great groups. Yeah. Adam asks a question I can't answer. What is your experience with writing about trauma for legal purposes, like filing a report or insurance form, and how is it similar or different from memoir? I don't know, Adam. I've never filed a legal or insurance form having to do with memoir, with trauma. And
Well, the first thing comes to my mind, yeah, it's very intellectual. That would
I don't
probably
give
be
legal
coming.
advice ever. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I don't either. That would be coming from a different headspace
yep.
rather than a heart space. It's coming from a brain and understanding, what the rights are of an individual, and that's a different
Mhm.
kind of writing.
I think so. I think you're going to have to take that one elsewhere, Adam. Sorry. Mary Janes asks, I've been seeing a psychologist for a couple of years. When writing about trauma, should you be particular on what kind of therapist to choose when writing a memoir? I've been in some form of therapy with counseling or psychologists. They sometimes do not help, in my opinion. For example, the one I'm seeing now suggests I not write about my trauma because of how it is troubling me. So I think that you say that and she says that she's seen therapists for about 10 to 15 years. Is there a particular way to discern who might be the best kind of therapist for a writer, Paula?
Well, I think, I mean, I'm prejudiced because I'm trained as a psychoanalyst and we're trained in trauma. So I think you have to, look at the experience of the therapist and their capacity to be able to tolerate uncertainty about what's coming up within the trauma, to be able to help you metabolize it and make sense of it. And not every therapist has the training or the capacity to do that.
Yeah,
Doesn't mean
that's
that to say that you're not getting good work done, but you may not be, there are good people out there who can really, really sit with this stuff day in and day out, hour after hour, and help metabolize it.
great. And as we wrap this up, which I dearly wish we didn't have to do, but I promised everybody would be out of here in an hour. Kathleen asks that I repeat the 3 acts that I went past pretty fast. So the way I teach everything at the Memoir Project is that it's a 3-act structure, no matter what form of memoir you're writing, blog post, essay, op-ed, long form essay, or book. And those 3 acts are this. Act 1, what's at stake? You must establish with your reader what it is that's at stake: alcoholism, recovery from abuse. Act 2 is what I tried, and Act 3 is what worked. And so with that, thank you, Paula Hamm. You are the person I call a lot, and for obvious reasons. So I deeply appreciate everything you do, your writing, your friendship, and the way you verbalize such enormous help for the world. So thank you so much. And everybody, if you would just send a little shout out to Paula, please, I would
Oh,
appreciate it
well,
in the chat.
thank you
That
so much, Marion. Very generous in having me come today. And I wish all who listen to this the best, and to be still and know that you are loved.
Oh, lovely. We'll leave it at that. You are loved. Thank you, everybody. Write well. Have a safe holiday. Stay, whatever you celebrate, and stay in touch. Thanks a million. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Are you there?